Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast, sponsored by Gold Group Realty. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week we are joined by Brandon Schorsch, the Outreach and Engagement Manager at Jewish Community Action, working on JCA's Combating Anti-Semitism and White Nationalism campaign. We talk about his new role at JCA, the hate crime bill that is currently working its way through the Minnesota Legislature, and Indiana Jones on this week's Who the Folk podcast. Brandon Schorsch, welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
So you are Jewish Community Action's new outreach and engagement manager.
Yes.
And when your boss, JCA Executive Director Karen Moratz, posted the job, the one and only, the fantastic friend of TC Jewfolk's, former board member of TC Jewfolk, when she had posted the job, it had the very enticing, exciting even title of Program Manager Combating Anti-Semitism and White Nationalism.
It did, yes.
So the job title has changed a little bit, but that is still the area of focus of the program, right?
Yes. So Karen and I and Lauren at JCA, we all sat down after I was hired, and we realized, wow, that is quite the mouthful of a title. Kind of hard to fit onto a business card. Kind of takes a lot of time to be like, hi there, Program Manager of the Combating Anti-Semitism and White Nationalism program. Gets a little mealy. So we kind of settled on Outreach and Engagement Manager. But pretty much the outreach and engagement that I'll be focusing on is around combating anti-Semitism and white nationalism.
So what led to JCA wanting to hire a role specifically for this area of focus? Because obviously it's an important one to the Jewish community and communities at large, other, communities of color and, minority communities.
Yeah. So, JCA has been doing this type of work for a long time, but kind of on the side. Karen and other members of JCA have done numerous trainings around the history of anti-Semitism, how it ties in with white nationalism. But recently JCA was awarded a grant and was able to go and expand these efforts and be able to go and staff up and have a more long-term program built around this rather than just kind of something that, as Karen put it, she was doing during her lunch breaks. Of course, that's assuming that Karen gets lunch breaks.
I was going to ask. She doesn't. I didn't think she got those.
Yeah, she just kind of just works nonstop. But during this mythical lunch break, that is when Karen was doing these trainings.
So, what have you started in January?
Yes.
For starters, right?
Yep.
So it's been a couple months as you're getting into the program. What's it been like? And as the first person in this role, are you building it from scratch, or are you sort of building off the building blocks that Karen had set up on her lunch breaks?
So it's a little bit of both. A large part of the curriculum kind of comes from what Karen's put together over the years, and Lauren Muscaplat at JCA is kind of in charge of the curriculum side of things.
Okay.
And I'm kind of there to go and work with nonprofits, activist groups, community groups, and kind of scope out who's interested in learning more about this, who might be able to use, these lessons. So that's kind of like my role. I'm kind of facilitating those outside conversations so then we can get into a room together and have those much, much deeper conversations.
So where does your, passion for combating anti-Semitism and white nationalism, I hope a lot of people have that. But,
yeah.
But where does and I don't want to say expertise either because that feels like a loaded word.
Yeah.
But where does the drive to take on this position, especially a brand new position with not a lot of roadmap necessarily come from?
Yeah. So, I'm just going to warn you, it gets a little heavy. So with,
fair enough.
And, I think that, this goes without saying for all of us within the Jewish community and who are within marginalized communities like or have loved ones who are in marginalized communities or who are at threat from things like white nationalism, this is something that we all hold really, really deeply. Like this type of ideology is quite terrifying. Yeah. But for me, what really drives me is I had friends in like who I grew up with who became radicalized, who I saw, go from, some of my best friends growing up, these empathetic kids, slowly become radicalized online throughout high school, and then, post-high school start posting neo-Nazi images, start, stockpiling guns. And I think it's really horrifying seeing that happen to people that you actually know.
Right.
It's something that we often, in the way that we consume, media, the way that we see things on the news, the way we see things online, oftentimes it's easy to be like, oh, it's just some troll behind a screen. Oh, these are just like, some, people who are just kind of like off the rails. They're maybe not that big of a threat. But in reality, there are people who are being radicalized into this who otherwise were just everyday people.
Right.
And that's it's really scary seeing it happen in essentially like slow motion. And that's something I don't want anybody else to have to see. And that's really what drives me, to kind of help raise awareness so then we can all have the better language to be able to identify it and stop that recruitment mechanism as well.
So when you saw it happening to the people that you knew, the kids you were friends with, did you try to stop? Was it? I guess at what point did you know that this was happening to them?
So that's a good question. Like with this, and what I'm talking about was, when I was same age, like we were high school age. So part of it's like, you don't really know what to do as
right.
a teenager, right? Like you just see like, whoa, this is like, whoa, you're saying some really messed up stuff. Like you can pull a friend aside, but ultimately, the hardest part is once somebody is kind of digging into those spaces online, there's an amount of social interaction that they're having, and either it's through a screen or it's face-to-face, but that self-selection, once they've already started self-selecting that type of content and going into those types of spaces, it's really, really hard to go and start diverting away. Yeah. So the hardest part was you don't really know until I didn't really know until it was too late. I didn't really, really know that so, like one of my friends was radicalized until it was literally too late. He had just passed from an opioid overdose, and I was at his memorial, and his parents they didn't know better. They just put up some of his stuff, and in there was a German Imperial naval jack, which neo-Nazis in Germany use to as a stand-in for a swastika. Because those are banned in Germany. Yep. So what you do is you go and you get the Imperial German flag and use that in its stead. And then once I started really looking at his stuff, online, I was like, oh my goodness, and that was really what drove me to go and do it. But I had a couple other friends who were radicalized, and they were much more clear with the way that they're radicalized, and joined militias and things like that. And went through the militia movement. He was kind of a little different, but still, it was really shocking. People who showed up to his memorial service, there were the friends, and then there were the people who were like, I don't know these people, and they are interesting.
Yeah. Where did you grow up? Where was this happening?
Oh, good question. So the other part is I grew up in Dallas, Texas.
Okay.
And I grew up in the same neighborhood that generated Richard Spencer.
Oh.
Yeah. So the other part is I grew up in this this segment of kind of a upper middle class area that is kind of one of the net generators of this new wave of alt-right ideology, where it's let's kind of make ourselves look nicer and try to get in those kind of horrific ideas and policies in through looking nice, speaking the right things on TV, but in reality holding those those very horrific views.
Yeah, because they realized that the shaved heads and tattoos everywhere were not a great look in terms of trying to be able to get their ideas in the mainstream.
Exactly. So like the other part is, like the high school I went to is, a lot of those kids also just, it's cycling that same type of feeder ideology, right? You don't start that way. I firmly believe nobody starts off, embracing these, types of hateful ideas.
Right.
But it's the communities you're in and around that can influence it, and then that's why that online aspect is so shocking, because it's also a community. It's just one that is harder for us to recognize right now because we're in this cultural shift where we're starting to be more and more online. So it's a little harder for us to identify how online communities work versus in-person communities, which, that has been the human existence since always.
Yes.
So we know what a what an in-person community looks like, and that's really where that shift in hate groups has gone from. It's gone from those in-person groups that were much easier to identify to people sharing those ideas and having that sense of community online instead, which is a little harder to identify until later on,
right,
when it can be too late.
It's interesting. I had a run-in, not even a run-in, or even an encounter, really. I was in my Cub Foods near my house, and there was a guy who I saw just his T-shirt at first. He was at the self-checkout, had a picture of Anne Frank on it. And I was a little, okay, that's different. And then I saw a patch on the sleeve of his jacket that said RAHOA, which I'm familiar with from reporting I did 20-odd years ago, which a shortened version of racial holy war. Then on the other sleeve was some sort of German imperial logo, and on the back took a picture of it, sent it to Dan Pluck and Pull at JCA. It was a rune of some sort, which is now being used as a neo-Nazi.
Runes.
They do.
Yep.
And he had to the buzz cut, from the buzz cut to the steel-toed boots with the red laces. This was a dude just out in the open, and it led me back to a lot of reporting I had done when I was in Detroit at the start of my journalism career. And there was some really, it was funny because it was talking about neo-Nazis and white supremacists on this newfangled thing called the internet. But it was a lot of working with the ADL in Detroit, which had a really strong presence. Can't speak about now, but in the late 90s had a really strong presence. And talking about what that looked like at that time. And that sort of bring awareness that this is what's happening and people are using the internet for really bad things. And 22, 23 years later, almost nothing's changed. It's this weird cycle that's going on. And, does this position sort of let you engage with other local and national groups to try to either get resources to teach with or to see what else is, going on in terms of like best practices to combat that sort of thing?
Oh, absolutely. And that's kind of what the first couple, weeks have been. Because we're not reinventing the wheel. Many people have been doing this work in many different places. So part of it's going and building up that tool chest, seeing who else has made these things, what we can go and adapt for Minnesota specifically, and for partners that we're going to be training. So it is nice that there are. It's also unfortunate that there is also this situation where this is happening everywhere and has been happening for so long that like we have tool sets that we have built, across the country and across the world, but it's also at least comforting that that nobody has to go and just start it from the bottom, right? Like that we can lean on each other to go and find those resources.
Right, you're not reinventing the wheel. which is, I would think, really nice.
Yeah.
In this new position that you have. I mean, JCA has done this work, and so there are some tools there. The spring real estate market is just heating up, and the team at Gold Group Realty would love an opportunity to help you navigate your way into the house of your dreams. Reach out to any of their outstanding agents, whose contact information is available at www.thegold.group. But what other organizations are there nationally? Because from what I know, there's nothing quite like JCA.
No.
Out there.
There are a couple other organizations that are similar. There's Carolina Jews for Justice. There's Detroit Jews for Justice that kind of do a lot more of the I'm going to say justice again. Social justice work, kind of like oriented community organizing stuff that's not exclusively within a Jewish community sphere, but is kind of like building those community connections. I'm always thinking I'm thinking of a wheel and spoke, like a hub.
Right, you're diagramming.
Yeah,
with your hands,
I'm realizing it's useless in a podcast, and I'm trying to describe what that is.
The wrong medium for that, but that's okay. That's okay.
You know, it's the same way that you've got like a wheel, and then you've got the spokes coming out, where you've got something as a hub in the middle, and then we all reach out to each other.
Right. Okay.
So there are some other orgs that do that.
So that's good that you're not out on an island.
Yes.
Which is nice. Now, one of the things that is happening here in Minnesota, which makes the timing of our talking really important, was earlier this week there was the press conference and the first hearings on the Minnesota Legislature's hate crimes bill.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that. I know we're going to have a story later this week in hopefully later this week in TC Jewfolk about that and where that is at in the process. I know the legislative process can be a little messy sometimes.
Yeah.
But in the first few days of the rollout of it and the hearings, how did it go and how is it proceeding from your point of view?
So, I'm going to say from my point of view, I'm going to be a little biased and a little joyful because I'm working on the community organizing kind of support side around this bill because JCA and a lot of other organizations are really, really excited about it, have been working with Representative Hornstein to put together this language. JCRC has been working on it. CARE has been working on it. Outfront Minnesota. And we're really excited. So the press conference was on Wednesday morning. That went great. And then the hearing, though it ended up being a little later in the evening than we were hoping because, like you said, the Capitol can be a little messy.
Yes.
I thought it went really, really well.
Okay.
We had people from kind of every possible aspect of what a bill kind of would cover. And to kind of give people an idea of what this bill does, it does three main things. We know that hate crimes and incidents of hate are vastly underreported.
Absolutely.
But also we know that they're also on the rise because even the small amount that is reported is going up. Mm-hmm. So the goal of this bill is to go and help close that underreporting gap. So one leg of it is opening things up to community organizations to be able to intake reports.
Okay.
So because we know that there are many communities that don't necessarily feel comfortable, calling law enforcement. So let's go and think about undocumented folks who may have, been attacked, might not necessarily feel comfortable calling the police to go and report that, but we want to know if that incident of hate has happened.
Right.
So this bill would go and allow people to go and report to community organizations like the JCRC, like CARE, like Navigate Minnesota, which works with undocumented folks like Outfront Minnesota. So then those organizations can collect those reports and send them to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. So then we can do things like what the ADL does with like heat mapping of where incidents of hate happens. Right. And then the other part is updating law enforcement's very dated trainings. Apparently the training manual on hate hasn't been updated in 30 years.
Yep,
and
1990.
And as we have been discussing today, some of these things have changed a little bit. The way that hate groups organize has changed. The way that they look has changed. but the pain that they inflict, that certainly has not changed. In terms of what it feels like, and the terror that it can induce. So I thought the hearing went fantastic. If I recall correctly, it passed without any opposition from its committee, which I think is a really good thing to see. It's easy for people to kind of take things and turn them into political footballs, and it was really nice to go and see that this was something that people across the political aisle recognized is really important, and that's a heartening thing to see in times like this.
Senator Latz, I believe, is ushering it through on the Senate side?
Yes, Senator Latz is carrying the Senate version of the bill. We have not yet had a Senate hearing yet, so the House version just had its first hearing, and after this and everything today, I'll be refreshing the Minnesota Legislature a little bit more, as I do pretty much every single day.
F5,
I hit that refresh.
F5.
Yeah, I hit that refresh button, hoping like, all right, do we have a hearing? Do we have a hearing?
That's the part of the process that, as the saying goes, two things you never want to see made are laws and sausages. It's a messy process. I mean, the legislative process is not neat and easy. It takes a lot of time, and I know spoke with Representative Hornstein a few weeks ago at the Jewish and Muslim Women's Day at the Capitol, and went with a couple different groups that were lobbying legislatures. And I think there was definitely a lot of support when this bill got brought up, and I think everybody's a little bit skeptical given the shorter session, whether there's the time or the shall we say political will, at least in the Senate, to move it through. But I think that it's gotten this kind of attention this year, even if it doesn't pass, hopefully bodes well.
Yeah.
For future sessions. But I think no reason to be, totally skeptical yet, right?
Yeah. And that's exactly how I feel. We're still, though we have a shorter session in Minnesota, I would still say we're still in kind of like, the first half. This is that time for building those coalitions, for getting people interested in bills, and getting people excited about them, because with something like this, I think it does bode really well, and it's easy to sometimes get stuck in those shoot, it's just going to be a partisan football. But I feel like this is a good one.
Right.
Yeah.
So what is it about, not just necessarily JCA in this job, but what is it about working in the nonprofit field that was appealing to you, that you're now doing this?
Ooh, that's a good question, because this is actually my first time working in the nonprofit field.
So what's your background then, if not nonprofit work? I assumed incorrectly.
Yeah, short background on me. I was a history archaeology double major, and the joke that I made when I was graduating from college was, I wanted to be Indiana Jones, but there are no more positions available to be a history professor. And it's not like there's positions, punching Nazis anymore. Unfortunately, one of those two things has changed.
I was going to ask, as a graduation gift, did you get a bullwhip and a hat?
I do have the hat, yes. I kind of bought it as a graduation gift for myself about 3 weeks before I graduated.
That's awesome.
It's a great hat. It's the official Indiana Jones hat. And
one of my favorite. Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of my favorite all-time movies.
Yep. Same. So I was a history archaeology double major. I went to law school for a little bit, decided not for me.
Okay.
And then just was working in coffee shops. I've, worked in coffee shops for a good 10 years of my life, combined, and moved out here to Minnesota when my now wife was getting into grad school for public health. Okay. And then I just stumbled on, these things called precinct caucuses in 2016, and I got sucked into electoral politics, and have been working in that a lot the past few years, and doing community organizing in the Whittier neighborhood where I live. Okay. So a lot of my experience is less on the nonprofit side, more on the partisan electoral side. Okay. with a little bit of I shouldn't say a little bit, but with a lot of kind of that community organizing lens that is kind of where it's that more free-form thing where you're not inside of a nonprofit structure and you're just kind of just doing it.
Right.
So there are parts where I'm like, oh, wow, like nonprofits are a little different. Not in a bad way. It's just like, like there's a different way that, a structured system is going to work versus kind of a more loosey-goosey kind of lateral organizing thing where there isn't a formal structure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this isn't all that different in that it is you're using that community organizing work that you've done with on the electoral
exactly
side.
Yeah. Because ultimately it comes down to the same things, right? Like community organizing, whether you're doing electoral organizing, whether you're doing issue-based organizing, it still comes down to talking with people, finding our shared values, finding our shared stories, and building community together. Because I think that part of the way that some people who may not necessarily be as familiar with community organizing may hear things is, oh, they're organizing between already existing communities. That's true, but the other part is building an even larger community.
Right.
And I think that's kind of a thing that sometimes gets lost.
I mean, and sometimes it's got to be building a bridge between two already existing communities, because there may be work happening somewhere else that, community A, community B are doing the same things, but are working towards a similar goal, and don't know that the other one is doing it, and this can help build that bridge between the two. Absolutely.
That's kind of one of the kind of difficult parts of the way that just organizing in general works. Whether you're in nonprofits, whether you're in electoral stuff, so many people are doing the same things, and we get so busy that we're not able to talk to each other, and then we find out, wait a minute, we were doing the same thing the whole time. Man, we should have been talking to each other.
Right, because you're just duplicating work.
Yeah.
It's an efficiency if you do it that way, right? If you find the other groups, working together.
Yeah, I mean, like there's a reason why like really, really large, like, corporations are able to be so efficient. Like there's less of that duplicative work, and that's kind of a harder thing when you're doing kind of ground up organizing.
Right. Well, and again, that's the beauty and pain of nonprofits is that sometimes you have one person doing 4 jobs.
Yep.
And so it's hard to give everything all the attention it deserves.
Yep.
As opposed to if you could have one person doing one job and you could pour everything into it.
Mm-hmm.
But
there's also the bright side of the more not to speak in favor of overworking. We should never overwork ourselves.
No.
But when we have those experiences of having to go and do multiple different things, I think it's also, some people say jack of all trades, master of none is a bad thing. I think it's actually a good thing, especially when it comes to things like community organizing. The more things, the more hats that we've worn, I think it makes us more effective at being able to go and see where each other are coming from, see the way that other people are thinking, and be able to be adaptive to an ever-changing world.
Yeah. And it helps build empathy for others and understanding for others, and others get understanding for you.
Yeah.
And that's how you end up building a coalition, I think.
Exactly.
I would think. I don't know because I've never done it. So.
Yeah.
I've never tried to do it. So.
In theory, that is how you build coalitions.
Right.
Like it's the same thing as like we put it, we say it, but then there's always going to be the little differences that we have to do with every single coalition.
Sure.
Kind of tweak it and change things up.
Yeah. Well, if it were that easy, everybody would do it.
Exactly.
All right. Well, Brandon Schorsch, thank you for coming in. Last couple questions.
Absolutely.
And we will get you out of here. Favorite Jewish food?
I think for me, it would be latkes. And brief background on me, like my dad's Jewish. My mom is Iowa-born corn farmer Lutheran.
Okay.
And like my brothers and I, we didn't grow up going to shul and stuff. And like the past few years have been me really reconnecting with my own Jewishness, but my mom tried being really, really supportive of us kids when we wanted to know more.
Okay.
And she tried so hard to make latkes and stuff with us, and I think that's why. Like,
okay.
You know, like there's something really beautiful in like that part of like my own like growing up, seeing that like my mom trying to be supportive of us when we didn't know what being Jewish was. She didn't either, but she really, really wanted to go and make us feel like that was something that is okay. And I think, you know, growing up in Texas in the early 2000s, you know, during kind of like the height of this kind of like stylish Bush era evangelicalism, it wasn't easy.
No.
And you know, I really respect that my mom really, really wanted to do that. So that's why latkes I think are my favorite.
All right. And favorite Jewish holiday?
You know, I'm getting really like, so me, you know, coming back into my Jewishness, I still haven't gotten to do all the holidays yet, right? Like really dive in, but like I'm really fascinated by the kind of the whole kind of growth cycle that like we're kind of approaching now with Pesach and Shavuot and everything. Like I'm really fascinated by that like kind of whole arc of holidays and you know, thought and Torah that I think that's kind of where I'm at right now. I feel like, you know, the more I dip in and the more I immerse myself and get reconnected, I'll probably be having an ever-changing answer over the years, though.
Well, and speaking of Seders, we'll let you plug the JCA Freedom Seder.
Thank you. I think that, you know, my office would be quite upset with me if I didn't. So super exciting. You know, the annual JCA Freedom Seder is at Mount Zion Temple on March 15th, 1 p.m.
2 p.m.
2 p.m. I'm thinking the time I need to be there. So 2 p.m. It's going to be great. A good time will be had by all. I absolutely love the JCA Freedom Seder. And it's also a really fun opportunity for me to go and bring my friends into and dip their toes into more Jewish spaces. So I'm excited, and I hope to see people there.
And special guest Governor Tim Walz will be
there. Special guest Governor Walz is going to be there.
That's a big get.
Yeah, it's a big one. You know, like, you know, having a sitting governor is
that's
kind of a big deal.
That's kind of a big deal. That's not nothing. That's pretty cool. Well, Brandon, thank you very much for joining us. It was great to meet you. Although, as you pointed out, we did meet very, very briefly in the middle of a very hot late July afternoon at the Never Again Action protest that I was covering, and you were participating, leading, hanging out. I remember meeting you, and I don't remember the circumstances.
Definitely was not leading. Okay. My wife was one of the people who was out there forming a human chain, blocking vehicles. But so I was definitely there, part of the action, supporting, and I got to meet a lot of really wonderful people that day.
There are some very, very neat people out there, that is for sure. Well, Brandon, thank you for coming in. Best of luck at JCA with this position and this new initiative, and we're looking forward to seeing everything you get going here.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening, and thanks to Gold Group Realty for sponsoring this week. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, rate, and review the show. If you have someone who you think should be on the podcast, please email me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. The Who the Folk podcast is a product of Jewfolk Inc. and part of the Jewfolk Podcast Network. For more shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.